Good morning, everybody. Okay, so this video is going to give you, I'm going to walk and talk you through the actual plan that I've written to this particular question. By now you've all had your individual feedback to the actual answer you wrote, so this video is sort of the final stage of the process of feedback, and once you play this video you'll be in a position to sort of write your own self-evaluation, which I'll set as an assignment in Teams. Okay, so there's the question: to what extent was the Second Reich created in 1871 a unified empire? Okay, so the purpose of the first stage of writing an A-level essay begins with the question analysis, hugely important. Okay, and the idea of the question analysis is to make sure you get to the hub of what the question is about, so you can work out what the main building blocks of your answer will be. Okay, and just to be really clear, this is not the same as writing a plan. Question analysis comes before planning. Okay, so the question analysis process, if you do it properly, and I've done a separate video about how to analyse a question, should hopefully then result in something like that. Okay, and what it basically means here is you should have worked out approximately how many building blocks will make up your answer. Okay, now the first and the last building block of an A-level essay will always be the introduction, okay, as your first building block. So I'm just getting my pen here. So your introduction and the conclusion, they are your first and last building blocks. But what we're really interested here with the question analysis is the middle bit. Okay, so here, as you can see, we've got 5 main building blocks, which I've numbered 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and as you can see, they're broadly broken down into building blocks 2 and 3 are what we would call the argument, and that's the part of the essay that presents an argument that supports the proposition. Okay, and the proposition, of course, the question is that Germany. You're being asked, was Germany unified in 1871? So if you're supporting the proposition, you're going to say, yeah, there's a couple of arguments that Germany was unified. Okay, and those are the 2 arguments. Okay, the first one is that Germany to some extent was politically unified, and the second argument is to some extent Germany was economically unified. Okay, and then the counter argument, which is building blocks 4, 5 and 6, that part of the essay considers the opposing argument. Okay, so you've almost got to imagine almost like 2 different historians in a room who are arguing with each other. The first historian is arguing for the proposition, and now the second historian, which is building blocks 4, 5 and 6, is presenting 3 arguments that challenge the proposition in the question. Okay, so here the 3 arguments are: first of all, there were, however, still strong regional divisions in the Second Reich that was created in 1871. And secondly, it could also be argued that the apparent political unity was just a pretense which disguised Prussian dominance. And then thirdly, in addition, there were still strong social divisions in the new Germany, and these divisions were becoming sharper and more dangerous. Okay. So the question analysis process has basically worked out, in a sense, 5 sentences. Okay, and I've numbered them there: 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, which are grouped into 2 of them are an argument and 3 of them are a counter argument. Now, if all you did was write down those sentences as an A-level essay, it clearly wouldn't be a very good essay. It would be very sharply focused. Okay, but it would be very, very brief. And for that reason, it simply wouldn't cut it. It wouldn't be able to achieve an A-level grade. So to achieve A-level grades and to work your way up to the A-level grades with A-level history, the next stage, of course, is really important. You've got to take each of those sentences and you've got to consider, how can I add knowledge to that to expand that sentence into a full paragraph? And maybe I've got so much knowledge, I'm going to expand that sentence into 2 paragraphs. But you've got to basically, what we call, develop that sentence, develop that point into a decent bit of information. Normally we would call it a paragraph. Okay, so you've got those 5 sentences that you're looking at there, and you've got to think, how am I going to expand each of them? The purpose of the next stage, which is the plan. So with the plan, you're taking your, what we call the topic sentences, those 5 topic sentences, and you're thinking, well, what information could I tag to those topic sentences that supports them? Okay, and that's why I've given you a planning template. Okay, so at the top you've got your introduction, and I always say that before you actually write your answer in an exam condition, actually write your introduction down in the plan. Actually write it word for word, or at least sketch it out so you know exactly what your introduction is going to say. Okay, then there's your first topic sentence. The Second Reich of 1871 brought about a greater degree of political unification than there had been previously. So that's the main point of the paragraph. And now there's the hard work. That means I've gone to my notes. I've spent time sifting through my notes, thinking, what are the key points that I could then put into that paragraph to develop it? And those are the points there. And then, sorry, using my finger as a pen there by mistake. And then there's the second point, and there's the development of that point. Okay, and there's the third, fourth, and fifth points, each with lots of development. Okay, and there's the space for the conclusion. Now, as you can see, once you've written your plan, you have in effect written your essay in note format. Okay, that's the purpose of a plan, and that's why a plan should probably take, during the 2 years where you're working on the course. When I send you home to work on an essay, the planning stage will probably take 2 or 3 hours to do it properly. Okay. Now, in the final exam, when you sit down in the exam, of course, all that information's in your head, so you don't need to plan like that. Okay. You just simply, in a sense, in the exam, you just analyse the question, work out what your topic sentences are going to be, do that in 2 or 3 minutes, and then because all the information, the detail is inside your head, you don't need to write out a detailed plan like that. Okay, you just simply start writing. But during the 2 years of the course, the planning stage is so important. Now, so you've got your plan then mapped out. What do you then do? Well, obviously, you've got to, when you're writing your essays at home, you're writing your essays in timed examination conditions. And that means you don't have your plan in front of you. You don't have your notes in front of you. So what you've then got to do is you've got to memorise that plan. You've got to sit down and simply learn it. You've got to commit the detail, and there's lots of dates and information there. You've got to commit that to memory. Okay, and then you put your plan out of the way, you put your notes out of the way, you get your piece of paper in front of you, and you know, right, I have got to write in 45 minutes, I've got to write, well, in this particular example, you've got to write 7 paragraphs. You've got to write an introduction, you've got to write 5 main building blocks, and you've got to write a conclusion. And you've got 45 minutes to do that, and you've got it all memorised, it's inside your head. So how are you going to do that? Well, you do the maths. 45 minutes, 7 components to the answer. That's 6 minutes 30 seconds for each of your paragraphs. Okay. Now I put there in that bullet point there. Remember though, the 7 components are not necessarily equally balanced. You may want to spend 7 minutes on one paragraph, 5 minutes on another. It kind of depends on your plan and how much you want to say. Okay. And that's basically what it comes down to, and I put it there. Timing is absolutely crucial. And I think for some of you with this first A-level essay, what you learned there is that you won't get the timing and the pacing right. Okay, for some of you were going too fast through your building blocks, and then you basically had finished your essay far too quickly. You hadn't developed your points well enough. For some of you, you spent too long on your earlier building blocks, and therefore you ran out of time. Okay, for some of you, you simply weren't writing fast enough. Okay, your pen was obviously stopping and you were thinking about things. With A-level, you've got to keep that pen moving. You've got all the information in your head. You've got to aim to be writing probably about 4 sides, depends on the size of your handwriting, in 45 minutes. So the timing bit is really crucial. Okay, so so in a sense, you've written out your 7 building blocks: the introduction, 5 main building blocks, and then your conclusion. And what I would do with the plan is I would actually write down on it the number of minutes you're going to spend on each of those building blocks. Is it 7 minutes? Is it 6 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? And it should all add up to something just short of 45 minutes. Then when you actually sit down to write your answer, you have a watch on the desk beside you, and let's just say you're starting writing your answer at 9 o'clock, and you've decided you're going to spend 6 minutes on your introduction. Then at 9:06 you're moving on to paragraph 1, and let's say you've decided to spend 7 minutes on paragraph 1. Then at 9:13 you move on to the second main paragraph. Okay, and so on and so forth. So by the time you get to your conclusion, and let's say you've decided to spend 7 minutes on your conclusion, it is 9:38, and you've got 7 minutes to write your conclusion. It's not 9:43 and you've only got 2 minutes to write your conclusion, because then your conclusion isn't going to be strong enough. You've got to get the pacing and the timing spot on. And that means you've got to be prepared to let go. So when you're writing a paragraph, you've got so much you want to put into that paragraph, but your 6 minutes is up. Well, don't punish yourself. Don't hang on to it and try to get more information in. You've got to prioritise. You've got to accept the fact you can't get everything into the essay that you want to get. Okay? It kind of in the end depends on how fast you can write. And so just be prepared to let go of that paragraph and move on to the next paragraph. So that's a really important skill that you're working on with A-level. It's the timing and the pacing bit. Okay? So what I'm now going to just quickly do in the second half of this video, and what I'll say is pause and read and then play, okay, for each section. I'm just going to take you through each section, but I'm not going to read it to you. You can read it yourself, okay? So here is the just a bit of information about what I'd be looking for in the introduction. So I think the key thing here is that the introduction must be reasonably substantial. The weakest introductions the weakest introductions just tend to repeat the question, okay? And the examiner actually wants you to show 2 things in the introduction. First of all, show that you've got a real sense of what the question is about, okay? So clearly this question is about how far Germany was unified. Was it really unified? Okay, but try to do that using some knowledge. Okay, actually put some knowledge into the introduction. So, for example, you could say Germany was politically unified by Prussian military strength. There was a series of wars in the 1860s. Okay, but there is debate by historians. Because the unification was arguably incomplete in different ways. I've said it's always good with an introduction if you include a little bit of evidence to the fact that you've got a bit of passion for this topic and you've been reading widely. And I always think it's really good to include possibly a little quote by a historian, as long as that quote is relevant to the question you're answering. Don't just put in a quote just for the sake of it. But if you can find a quote where, say, for example, Richard Evans gives a little pithy comment about how far Germany was unified, and you can just take that quote and memorize it, maybe just 6 or 7 words, and put it in, okay, to your introduction, that's good. I always think it's really good as well if you can use the word historians and debate in your introduction, because that is, in the end, is why you're being set an A-level essay question. As I used that previous analogy, it's almost as if you've got 2 historians in a room and they're arguing about it. And neither historian is wrong, that's the point. There are different points of view and there is debate. Okay, so you could simply put in a phrase that the extent of German unification has been fiercely debated by historians over many decades. Okay, that sort of phrase looks quite good in an introduction. And the final bit is, make sure that you give an indication of what your likely conclusion is going to be, okay? So you're in the end going to be coming down on one of the arguments. You've got an argument and a counter-argument, okay? The argument is that Germany was pretty well unified, okay? And the counter-argument is actually it was quite divided beneath the surface, Okay, that's really in the end what it's about. Now, where in the end is your final answer going to lie? Are you going to be lying more on one side or the other? Give an indication. Okay, so set the direction of travel in your introduction. That's really important. Okay. So then the opening section of the essay, the first two building blocks, will then present an argument which supports the proposition that the German Empire, to some extent, was unified in 1871. Okay, so remember that we looked at that in the plan, and then there are two main building blocks that we've identified from our question analysis. And there's our sort of first building block, okay? And what I've done is a good plan, remember, has written out the topic sentence. So the topic sentence, which is usually the first sentence in the paragraph, is this: the Second Reich of 1871 brought about a greater degree of political unification than there had been previously. Okay, so now just pause the video and read the supporting points. Okay, so again, I'm not going to take you through those point by point by point. You can read that yourself, and hopefully you've got the knowledge there. But again, get that sort of sense. You got that topic sentence, okay, and you're going to basically develop that. And you may have decided you've got 6 minutes, okay, 6 minutes to write that paragraph. And the point of the paragraph is, to a large extent, Germany was much better unified by the beginning of 1871 than Germany had ever been before. Okay, and you're going to develop that by saying that Germany was militarily brought together by Prussia winning a war against France, and that in January 1871, as a result of this victorious war against France, the 38 previous states came together and agreed that they recognised a kind of umbrella arrangement in which the King of Prussia would now be the Emperor of Germany, and of which the 38 states, which have now changed to 25 because there was some changing of the borders, etc., they're now working together as an empire. So there's now an empire, and that was that sense of unification coming together politically was much greater than anything that had existed before, and it was very much recognised in the constitution that was drawn up in January 1871. Okay, now there's quite a lot of information to put there. I would say that if there's anything that's really important, it's that is the fourth bullet point, that for the first time ever, there is now for the first time for this large German area. It's not the first time ever, actually. I correct myself on that. But the huge change of 1871 is there's now a national parliament that represents all German people within the recognised boundaries of the German Empire. Okay, and the national parliament consisted of two houses, and the lower house was the Reichstag, and it gave all German men aged 25 and above an equal vote. And so that Reichstag has given visible expression to the fact that ordinary Germans have now come together. In a sense, it appeared as if for the first time you've got a democratic Germany, that ordinary Germans can have a genuine say in the running of this new Germany. And as you know, of course, no law can be passed by the new imperial government led by Bismarck without a vote in the Reichstag chamber, and Bismarck can't pass any law unless more than half of the members of the Reichstag chamber, which have been voted in by the ordinary German people, approve of that particular law. Okay, and also then you've got an upper house of the imperial parliament, the Bundesrat, which also gave visual representation, visible sign of the fact there was a new unified empire, because the Bundesrat was the place where the separate monarchs of the 25 separate states, 22 of them were led by monarchs. Those 25 separate states sent delegates to the capital city, Berlin, and they would meet in the upper chamber of the Bundesrat. And again, no national law could be passed without the approval of those 58 delegates who've been sent there by the monarchs the separate German states. Okay, so you've got 6 minutes to kind of like get as much of that as across as possible, and you've got to write much more concisely than I've just spoken to you now. You've got to think it through. You've got to be quite punchy. What are the key points? Which is why I've written those down as 5 bullet points. Now, I would honestly say if you've worked out in your plan, let's say you've got 6 minutes to write all that down. Personally, I would probably say 7 minutes would be better because this is one of the biggest building blocks. Practice it, write it, sit down, get the clock out. You've got 7 minutes. Try to put that topic sentence in at the beginning and keep writing and get it across as concisely as you can. But you've got to practice. That's the whole point. Okay, so there's your first building block. There's our second building block then. Okay, so again, look at that topic sentence. Now, this building block, you're still supporting the proposition, but what you're going to do now is you're going to shift and you're going to look at the economic side of things, and you're still supporting it. So you're saying, also, in addition to political unification, and there's that key phrase that links to the previous paragraph, there was also a greater degree of economic unity in 1871 than there had been previously. And remember, that's why topic sentences are so important. They do two things. They've got to link to the previous paragraph, but they've also got to introduce this new paragraph. Okay, so this new paragraph is going to be supporting the proposition that there was a greater degree of economic unity in 1871 than there had been previously. So again, just pause the video and read those bullet points. Okay, and so again, perhaps you've given yourself 6 minutes to write this. So you get that topic sentence down, and then you've got those key points, and depending on how fast you can write, you may not be able to sort of like put as much detail in, but I would challenge you and say in 6 minutes you should be able to get most of that down. But you've got to simply memorize it and learn it. Okay, but if you're a little bit pushed for time, what are the key things that absolutely I would want to see? I think I would absolutely want to sort of see is that to a large extent Germany was already economically unified before 1871. There was an economic organisation called the Zollverein that had been there before 1871, so that across the 38 separate states, before Germany became a unified nation, there was a definite sense of Germanness through trading, through this trading organisation, the Zollverein. But the main drivers for unification were the middle classes, the people who owned the wealth of the German states, the businessmen to a large extent, particularly the industrialised states. Okay, they were the ones who were most in favour of having a proper political entity called Germany, an empire, because a united Germany would be good for business, basically. And so when Germany came into existence in 1871, the middle classes of the separate 25 German states formed a political party called the National Liberals, and they were the largest party in the first Reichstag, and they worked closely with the first leader of Germany, the chancellor of this new German Empire, Bismarck, to pass a series of unifying laws that were very, very quickly passed. Look at the dates, 1871 to 72. Very quickly, Bismarck pushed through the Reichstag, and the National Liberals very much voted for this. We want to have a common currency, weights and measures, civil code, etc. So yes, by the end of 1871, certainly by 1872, there was a large degree of economic and social unity, because of course this new empire was the middle classes coming together, backing the creation of this new empire, which would be led by the Prussian upper classes. Okay, so those again are the key points you want to get across in that second building block. So in a sense, you're probably about halfway through your essay now. You've written an introduction and you've written 2 building blocks that are in support of the proposition. Now, you then, in the remainder of the essay, you suddenly shift foot, because what you're now going to do is you're going to basically say, in spite of what I've just said, there's a pretty convincing arguments put forward by some historians that would say, actually, that Germany was not really fully unified, that the unification, in a sense, it appeared to be united, strong centralised national government, and a degree of economic unification. It appeared to be unified on the surface, but dig beneath it, and actually there was quite a lot of division within this new Germany. There was still a lot more to do before you've got all Germans pulling together and working in the same way. And remember, what your plan has done is you've identified 3 key arguments that are going to challenge that proposition about unification. And so there's our first building block. Okay, and in essence, you're saying there were strong regional divisions, and there's our topic sentence. Okay, now again, notice how it does those 2 things. First of all, that first phrase, it's linking to what has gone before. In spite of the apparent political and economic unification, that's links to what you've done before. There were, however, still strong regional divisions in the Second Reich that was created in 1871. So the second half of that sentence is giving an indication this paragraph is going to be about the regional divisions. So again, pause the video and just have a quick read through that. Okay, so same sort of point, that you may have allocated, let's say, 7 minutes to write a paragraph on this. Have a go. Okay, get that topic sentence down. That'll probably take you 30 seconds, 45 seconds maybe to write, and then you've got maybe 5 or 6 minutes to get as much of that information behind that topic sentence. Okay, and so the key things you want to get across are: religion was a divisive issue. Get some information, Catholics v Protestants. There were ethnic divisions. Get some information down about the French and the Danes, etc. Poles. The largest German state was deliberately excluded, so there were many German-speaking people who were not included in the new Germany. Get that down. And then that final bullet point is the new Germany, the constitution was a federal constitution, so the separate states continued to exist. There still continued to be a king of Bavaria and a Bavarian government, a cabinet, and a Bavarian parliament. And within Bavaria, the people of Bavaria, sitting beneath their king and their cabinet and their parliament, govern themselves on certain issues, such as, for example, education. Direct taxation was controlled by the separate states. Remember, direct taxation is income tax, taxation on earnings. And the national government, the imperial government, only controlled sales tax. So the German emperor and Bismarck and his national government, they actually had fairly limited income. Their budget was money from sales tax, okay, which arguably weakened their central control. So those are the sort of key points. Strong sense of regionalism, therefore, okay. People continued to identify and take very seriously the particular region of Germany they lived in. To a large extent, Berlin and this national government led by Bismarck could be a long, long way away and quite distant in a sense, and not really very immediate in terms of people's lives, which is the point you're trying to get across in that paragraph. Okay, that's the third building block. And then building block 4, which is the second argument, which would challenge the proposition. Remember, what we're doing in this second half of the essay is you're arguing that there was division. This is the paragraph where you would want to say, actually, the political unification was just a veneer. It was just a thin disguise of Prussian dominance. And again, there's our topic sentence. So you're linking with the paragraph before, just with that word also. It could also be argued that the apparent political unity was just a pretense which disguised in the end Prussia dominating. That really, was it really a German unification, or was it Prussia expanding her power? That's really what this paragraph is about. So it is a counter-argument. So again, pause the video, have a quick read of the development there, the type of information that would go in to that paragraph. Okay, so again, hopefully you've got a sense of that. You may have, let's say, giving yourself 5 minutes to write this paragraph. Those are the key points, okay? It's about Prussia enlarged, that for example, in the upper house of the national parliament, Prussia controlled 17 of the 58 seats, and that effectively gave her control of the upper house. That Prussia geographically was huge. About 6/10 of Germany was actually Prussia. And so that basically meant, if you think about it, although it's one man, one vote for the national parliament, the Reichstag, the lower house, actually for many matters such as education, lawmaking is made by the state parliament. And the Prussian state parliament, the Landtag, was this heavily weighted voting system. The upper classes had a vote that counted for 3. The middle classes had a vote that counted for 2, and the working classes had a vote that counted for 1. So 60% of Germans, for regional state affairs, the laws were passed by the state government. Actually, they lived in a fairly authoritarian setup, okay, in which they didn't really have much say. Okay, and that's why I think that word authoritarian is an important word. Okay, so again, that's the sense that you've got to try and get across in that paragraph. Okay, that's what that building block is about. And then the final building block. Now, this is the one where you want to say that another way in which Germany was beneath the surface, quite divided, was there was a great deal of tensions, divisions between social classes. Okay, so there's our topic sentence. So again, notice how it links to the previous paragraph. That simple phrase, in addition, that's all, just 2 words, successfully links it to the previous paragraph. And then it introduces what this paragraph is about. Very, very, again, as always with topic sentences, very sharply focused on the question. There were still strong social divisions in the new Germany, and these divisions were becoming sharper and more dangerous. Okay, so again, pause the video, have a quick look at the key points. And again, as with all of the previous building blocks, the purpose of these bullet points that you've got to kind of like develop into a paragraph is to really show you've got detailed knowledge and make it relevant. Okay, so the sort of points you want to make here about social division, you know, use the sort of like precise, the precise vocabulary. There's a nice word there, fracturing. Okay. Kind of captures the word of divisions, and in particular you've got at the lower levels of society the sort of birth of socialism. There was a socialist political party that was called the SAPD, led by Bebel and Liebknecht. Okay, I've referred to a document in the textbook. You might be able to find a particular sentence or line you want to incorporate into your answer. And Bebel spoke out against this authoritarian nature of the new Germany. He said, in the end, this is not a real democracy. That in the end, although we're getting all very excited about having a united Germany, in the end, the majority of Germans, the poor urban working classes, in other words, are basically living under a very authoritarian structure. And we don't really have a say in the running of this new Germany. So there is, although as good as it is, this united Germany, there is a lot more that could be done. Okay, to create a real united Germany, to have a real united Germany, the urban working classes have got to be given a much greater buy-in, a much greater say in the government of this new German empire. That sort of thing. Okay, and that of course created fear, because the elites, the new German industrial elites, then aligned themselves with the old Prussian conservative elites, and of course that was the alliance of Steel and Rye, Sammlungspolitik. And then there's also that really other important point that the lower middle classes, the kind of artisans, the craft workers, the small shopkeepers, what we call the Mittelstand, they were a very, very alienated group. They felt really threatened by this new, the new world that they were entering, where they're, from above they're being squeezed out by big business, and from below the formation of working class trade unions. They felt excluded from this new Germany. So again, I think that's a relevant point. So again, ask yourself, how long have you given yourself to write that paragraph? And you've got to get as much of that across in the time that you've actually got. And then hopefully, as I used the example earlier, let's say you've given yourself 45 minutes, you're starting at 9 o'clock, you've worked out 7 minutes to that paragraph, 5 minutes to that, 6 minutes to that, you've kept to the timing. Hopefully, if you've worked out, let's say I'm going to give myself 7 minutes for my conclusion, it's hopefully now 9:38, and you've got 7 minutes to write your conclusion. Okay, so again, your conclusion, if you manage your time well, you've got a decent bit of time left to write a conclusion, and it's got to be good. Okay, so now how to write a conclusion. Remember, I've scanned that chapter from the history manual that I've referred you to, and there's a good section there about how to write a conclusion. It needs to be personal to you. There's no such thing as a model conclusion. But the important thing is it needs to weigh up what you've said before, weigh up the different arguments and counter arguments, kind of pull them together, okay? And then don't sit on that fence, but step off it. If you're sitting on the fence, you'll come up with a fairly lame conclusion, something along the lines of, well, there were arguments that support the idea for unification, but there are also some arguments that are against the idea of unification, that Germany was divided, and in the end Germany was partly unified with underlying divisions. Okay, that's a bit lame. Okay, in the end you've got to take a final position in support of one argument over the other. Now, it doesn't mean you're completely rejecting the argument you don't agree with, but I think you want to say something along the lines of, ultimately, the more convincing argument is, and make sure you give a reason why. Okay, so give the impression with your conclusion that you're confident. You've got to write with confidence. You can't really write cautiously. Now, be careful. That doesn't mean you've got to be blind and blinkered and basically so subjective that you completely discount and say, this is the answer, and I'm rejecting everything from the other side are saying. I always think it's very dangerous to sort of take that position. You've got to be balanced, okay? But find a position somewhere that is not completely on that fence. Hopefully that makes sense, okay? So there you go. It's a crafted piece of work, an A-level answer, and that's why it's A-level, folks. That's why it's not GCSE. It requires legwork. You've got to analyse that question. You've got to plan in detail. Then you've got to learn the information. And then when you sit down there with that blank bit of paper for 45 minutes, boy, oh boy, you've got to have that watch on the table in front of you, and you've got to manage your timing. And you've got to be prepared to let go. You've got to understand that as fast as you're writing, you're probably not going to get everything down you want to be able to say. Okay, so you've got to be able to prioritise. So I hope that's useful for you. I'll say one final thing, and it's not on the slideshow, and this is a really, really important thing. From my experience, and years, I've been teaching A-level for 30 odd years, the students who will make the most progress and who will do best, once they've had the feedback, they will go, wow, I've got a burning sense here that I actually want to have another go at this. It's only going to take 45 minutes. I'm going to sit down and have another go at this, and then they will write it again, and then they will give it in to me. Okay? Now, I'm not weighing on a big guilt thing here for you. I'm not saying, God, you've got to go away and I've decided you're not a serious A-level student if you don't want to do this one. But probably over the 2 years of the course, the best students, the very best students, will have voluntarily, without being asked, on probably 5 or 6 occasions, possibly more. I think of some students who have really gone on to get the A stars. You know, they've done it quite regularly. Okay, not with every single essay by any means, but periodically they'll hand me a question and say, I've had a second go of this. Have a quick look. Is this better? Okay, and it's that sort of burning ambition to improve your answer that will make a huge difference. So there you go. That's something for you to think about. It makes me so happy when people do that, because I know in the end it's going to help you make the progress that you need to make. Thank you very much. I'll sign off now, and hopefully that was useful for you.